And the next item on this, the 70th weekly show from Radio Free UK, is actually from the BBC. And much as we disapprove of the BBC, their privileged position does give them access to material that we couldn't get otherwise. So until we displace them, we're happy to include their content. This is Stephen Sacker on BBC Hardtalk, interviewing Michael O'Leary, boss of Ryanair, who at one time was an outspoken opponent of the EU, but now seems to have become one of its best friends. But as a businessman, money comes first. So it's interesting to see what he's doing with Ryanair following the Brexit vote.
You're listening to a podcast from the BBC World Service. This is Hard Talk with me, Stephen Sacker. Thanks for downloading this edition of the programme. I do hope you enjoy it. Welcome to Hard Talk on the BBC World Service with me, Stephen Sacker. My guest today is one of Ireland's most successful and certainly most noisily opinionated business leaders, Michael O'Leary, longtime CEO of Ryanair, the massively successful low-cost airline which carries more passengers around Europe than any other airline. Michael O'Leary's business model was built on offering eye-poppingly low fares, but with absolutely no frills and no pretense of giving the customer a comfortable experience. In recent years, he's tried to adapt the model slightly, from cheap and nasty to cheap and cheerful. But in the end, Ryanair's success is all about one thing: low prices. But now there's a major cloud on O'Leary's horizon in the form of Brexit. When Britain leaves the EU, life for a Europe-wide business like Ryanair is going to get mighty complicated. And the same goes for Ireland as a whole. One former Irish Prime Minister said Brexit represents the biggest crisis facing his country in 50 years. So how will the Irish overcome the Brexit blues? Michael O'Leary joins me now. Welcome to Hard Talk.
It's a great pleasure to be here, and welcome to sunny Dublin.
How big a problem is Brexit for you right now?
No, it won't alter the business plan. It will still grow from 100 million passengers last year to about 180 million passengers over the next 8 years. But it's clear that we're going to have to pivot some of that growth away from the UK. So I think the UK will lose out, certainly over the next 2 years, as there is this political and economic uncertainty. But Ryanair will continue to grow strongly. Just more of that growth will take place in continental Europe instead of in the UK.
But businesses don't like uncertainty, and there is now uncertainty all over the place, not least amongst your passengers who don't know what their own incomes will look like, and they also don't know, looking ahead 2, 3, 4 years, about how easy it's going to be to travel around Europe. So when you're making a plan for your future, suddenly uncertainty is everywhere.
It is, but in Ryanair we love uncertainty because we have the one great response to uncertain times, uncertain economic times, and that is lower prices. We issued a profit warning last week on the back of the fact that we're going to cut fares this winter by 15%, an unheard of reduction in airfares. But it means
but that's eating into your profits.
But I think that's a good thing. It's eating into my profit.
Do you think your shareholders feel the same way, given what's happened to your share price?
My shareholders can wait in line. It's much more important that we are looking after our customers, that we are reducing the cost of air travel for our customers, and over the longer term, our shareholders will benefit. But in the short term, they'll have to take some pain.
Yeah, the problem is, it comes back to how much pain you're going to have to take. You don't know, for example, how low the pound's going to go against the dollar, but that is another big problem for you.
It's not really. I mean, the UK accounts for about 25% of our revenues.
Yeah, it's your biggest market.
It is.
And the pound is now so much weaker. Again, it's going to lead people, ordinary families across the UK, to think, can I afford that foreign holiday? Can I afford to fly Ryanair?
What it'll do is it'll lead more and more of them to book Ryanair, because it's the only way they'll be able to afford those holidays in Spain, in Italy, in Greece, all over Europe.
Let's talk about that phrase you've already used in this interview, and you've used it before as well, this pivot that you feel you now have to make away from your core operations in the UK. What does that really mean in practical terms?
Well, firstly, our core operations are not the UK. Core operations are Europe. As I said, the UK accounts for about 25% of our revenues, Europe about 75%. I think our plan next year in 2017, Stephen, was we were going to grow capacity in the UK by about 12%. We now expect to grow by about 5%. So we've halved our rate of growth next year in the UK, and we've reallocated those aircraft and those additional flights to countries like Germany, Italy, Poland, where, frankly, we can continue to grow without the risks of of Brexit or the economic uncertainty of Brexit. Some of those flights will operate back into the UK, but there'll be less capacity in the UK for the next year or two while somebody tells us what the hell is going to happen with Brexit.
So yours is one significant example of the way in which Brexit and the uncertainty that comes with it is doing real material damage to the UK economy.
There's no question in my mind that Brexit will do. The uncertainty over Brexit, I mean, we have to be careful here. We're still 2 years away from Brexit.
Sure.
So we're in a period of great uncertainty, not helped by the lack of political leadership in the UK, because nobody in the UK has a clue what Brexit looks like, and we simply have to weather our way through that uncertainty.
Here's a quote from a very grumpy Michael O'Leary after June 23rd. You said, whether the UK leaves the EU or stays, frankly, I couldn't care less. The issue for us is all about whether the UK stays in the single market.
Yeah.
Well, since you said that, I think it's become clearer that it's very unlikely that we're either going to stay inside the single market or have extremely preferential access to it. Given what you've heard in the last few days and weeks, what is your view of the final deal that is likely to be done?
In my view, I think the final deal will be the UK will stay in the single market.
Really?
Yeah, I think they'll concede open borders.
Well, have you had any clue from anybody in government that that's the way they're heading?
Absolutely not. And look at that, I called the referendum wrong as well.
So that's just wishful thinking on your part?
I think it's the more practical reality. Remember, most of the UK population in the referendum was sold a lie. The lie was that you could leave the European Union but stay in the single market. It's now becoming quite clear you can't. You're either going to stay in the single market, in which case you'll obey European regulations and you'll concede free movement of people, which I think ultimately is what's going to happen, or you leave, in which case the UK economy is going to suffer a very long and very dark recession.
Well, let's suppose that actually it's a hard Brexit, as they say, and that we accept the WTO basic trade arrangements with Europe, speaking from the point of view of the UK, and nothing more. At that point, would you have to seriously reassess your entire operation in the UK?
Again, it's hard to know, Stephen, because it depends on what the UK does with open skies. If the UK leaves open skies, and it's again hard to envisage, you could go back to UK citizens needing visas to go on holidays in Spain and Italy and in Greece. Again, it's hard to envisage, but if they do, at the end of the day, the UK citizens will still want to go on holidays to Spain, Italy and Greece. It may be more expensive, it may be more cumbersome, they may need visas, but the people will still fly. And the evidence of our growth over the last 30 years across post 9/11 and every wars, pestilence, is people will keep flying.
You've got also a very specific problem about your shareholder base. What percentage of your shareholders are UK based?
Yeah, we think probably about 25% of our shareholders are UK nationals. And again, if the UK leaves open skies, it looks, in theory, you may have to treat the UK shareholders as non-EU shareholders, like American shareholders,
of course you would,
and force them off the register. But the corollary of that is BA IAG will also have to separate BA from Iberia. They won't be able to own each other. It will cause chaos within the airline industry, which is why, again, it's almost hard to envisage that hard Brexit will actually be the outcome. Again, because even if it is, can the UK...
But frankly, the decision isn't being made upon the interests of businesses like yours. It's a political decision.
I understand, but the political decision is based on an assumption that you can control your borders. Look, we had a hard border between the north of Ireland and the Republic of Ireland for 30 years, with British Army troops manning the border, and they were never able to secure the border. So this idea that the politicians are selling in the UK that you can control your borders if only we leave the single market, A, is absurd, B, is undeliverable, and C, I'm not sure when the real reality dawns on the UK electorate and UK politicians that you can't stay in the single market, I think they'll change their minds.
A final specific on your business, then I want to broaden it out. But I think I'm right in saying this year you are getting 50 new planes.
Yeah, every year.
Major investment. How many of those planes, given what you're seeing happening in the UK, are you actually going to put in the UK?
Originally, Stephen, we were going to put about 12 of those aircraft in the UK in 2017. Now we're going to put none in the UK. None. They'll all be based at European airports. Now, some will still fly back into the UK. We will add some flights to probably UK regional airports. We're not growing at Stansted, we're not growing in Manchester, but we are growing in places like Edinburgh and Glasgow. So some capacity.
You've characterised the Brexit vote as madness. Do you take some responsibility for it? And in that, I mean, I've known you for a long time. I was there in 2004 in Brussels when you came out of a meeting with the European Commission describing the European Commission as, this is a direct quote, the evil empire. And every year since, you have taken every opportunity to slag off Brussels, slag off the institutions of the European Union and suggest that it's deeply dysfunctional. Can't be any surprise to you that the British, hearing what you say about the EU, decide to walk away from it.
I think it was a huge surprise. Firstly, we've been consistently critical of the corruption, the kind of bad policies that come out of the European Commission in particular. But we have consistently over 20 years been a singular advocate of the single market. In fact, we've campaigned twice in Ireland.
Forgive me, but why would the British people, listening to you describe the Commission, the executive arm of the EU, as the evil empire? Why would they want to stay in this evil empire?
Because I think you've only got two choices. And frankly, I supported David Cameron's position, which was you stay in and reform from within. There's a significant desire to see a reform and efficiency within the European Union. You go back to the days of Margaret Thatcher, when Europe was a single market, and it was a competitive single market. It's brought about low-fare air travel. It's just one of the great things it has delivered. What has happened in recent years, it has moved away from advocating a single market towards this kind of political union, which nobody, frankly, supports.
Which suggests that it's, in many ways, to many people, unreformable. Only a month ago, you made a big noise here in Ireland by telling the Irish government, your best advice, to tell the EU to F off over an EU ruling about tax and Apple.
Yeah.
Again, it's about a sort of tone you adopt, a responsibility that you've taken upon yourself to constantly tell the public that the EU and all of its institutions are deeply dysfunctional and not operating in their interest.
Again, it's a selective review of history. I've campaigned actively on the two Irish referendums, on Nice and on Lisbon, in favour of a yes vote in Ireland. I campaigned actively in the Brexit referendum in the UK in favour of a yes vote, because I believe in the single market, I believe in the European project as a single market. But yes, the Commission has not delivered. It will continue to fail unless we who are within that stay in and reform.
Let's move on to a very important but different decision facing the UK government. That is where to put a new runway to serve London and the southeast of England. Yeah. You've taken a view on it. You've expressed an opinion that they ought to be building more than one new runway. Sure. All the noises we get, and I should say we're recording this interview before the latest government statement on this, but all the noises we get is that they favour going ahead with a third runway at Heathrow. If that's the decision, what's your view of it?
Well, firstly, I mean, we were recording this just after they've announced that they're going to dither and fudge for at least another 12 months, which is a shame. Theresa May was elected.
They call it necessary consultation.
Look,
but the bottom line is...
They've been consulting on this thing for 15 years. They keep kicking the can down the road. The bottom line is, one runway in the southeast is not sufficient. Even if you approve Heathrow runway 3, it won't be delivered for another 10 years. It will be full before it's even completed. And that assumes you can move the M25 or tunnel under the M25. The way to address this, and the UK is particularly bad at dealing with these big infrastructural projects, whether it's runways or HS2, is actually to let the market deliver. You have 3 competing airports in London, Heathrow, Gatwick and Stansted, pretty good road infrastructure, pretty good services there. Allow each airport to build another runway. I fail to understand what the government, the UK government, is doing in the middle of a decision on providing infrastructure. Let the 3 airports provide their own runways if they want to build another runway. The only way to solve this problem for the long term in the UK is to not permit one, but actually to authorise 3 additional runways in the southeast, one at Heathrow, one at Gatwick, one at Stansted, because it's only by providing that competing developments you'll keep the cost of that runway infrastructure down.
You have always, as long as I've been talking to you, had these massive and ambitious expansion plans for Ryanair. You once said, in 30 years' time, I hope Ryanair won't be carrying, 100+ million passengers. I hope we'll be doing 10 times that, which logic would suggest would be a billion passengers a year.
Must have been a very fine bottle of wine.
When are you going to realise that actually just constant expansion, constant growth cannot be maintained?
I think, look, I mean, yes, you're right over the longer term, but certainly we have a plan and we have aircraft orders in place now to grow to 180 million passengers over the next 8 years. And Ryanair will carry 100.
Is there a part of you that's actually beginning to regret some of that ambitious 10-year plan? Do you really need all those aircraft?
Yes, because at the prices we're charging, I mean, the demand for Ryanair services all across Europe, in the UK, in Ireland, all across Europe, has never been higher.
The message hasn't changed, that's clear. But actually,
prices have. They've come down.
Well, I'll tell you what else has changed, and you would acknowledge it, I guess. Your tone. You know, you had to change the way you approached the customer. Because you used to be proud of being, well, let's say, you said it yourself, cheap and nasty, and you said we've got to change and be cheap and cheerful. How hard is it for you to be cheap and cheerful at the same time?
I think it's been a learning process. You know, I think for the last 15 or 20 years in Ryanair, we were obsessed with having the lowest cost, and it almost didn't matter how you treated the passengers.
Absolutely, and we passengers felt it every time we got anywhere near your airline.
True, except the passenger numbers kept rising. And I think we should have realised earlier than we did, actually, passengers want a bit more service than just, they're not prepared to, they want more than just the basic, safe, on-time flight. We should have given allocated seating. We should be nicer when problems arise. We should address some of the passengers' concerns. And we're working very hard to do that.
It's interesting that you say, given the Brexit climate and the uncertainty in the UK, we are going to pivot much more to our Europe-wide operations. That's where our expansion lies and where our future lies. The trouble is, the way you run your airline runs counter to so many of the sort of social and economic policies and regulations that are in place in key European markets for you. You're being taken to court in France. Well, you're being taken to court in France. In fact, you lost a big court case in France and you're appealing it.
Well, we lost the local case.
You're in huge trouble with the German tax authorities because of the way you claim that pilots working for you are self-employed when the German authorities say they're not. You know, you've got a problem that your values are not European values.
Not true. Firstly, we are the fastest growing airline in Europe.
What's not true about what I've just said?
Well, let me give you. We're the fastest growing airline in Europe. So last year we carried 106 million passengers. This year 119 million passengers. So the consumers of Europe support us. Let me deal with a couple of issues. We're being attacked by the French government over employment of pilots and cabin crew in France. We don't employ any pilots or cabin crew in France. All of our pilots, all of our cabin crew, who are Irish, are employed on Irish contracts, flying Irish aircraft. And
and the French courts believe that they are fundamentally working in France.
And yet they're not.
The way you arrange it is unacceptable.
To support that.
Wait, but the evidence is that the courts have decided against you.
The local French court in Aix-en-Provence, which we will be appealing. Eventually, the European Commission supports our stance, as does the Irish government, which requires us as an Irish airline that all of our employees flying on Irish registered aircraft, which are legally defined as Ireland, must pay their taxes in Ireland.
The German case is interesting too.
The German cases have already said Ryanair is not involved in the German cases. There are a number of pilots who are employed
and who do they fly for?
Who are employed by Ryanair.
Thank you.
Who have paid their taxes in Ireland, sought a refund of taxes in Ireland because they were resident in Germany, and then didn't pay their taxes in Germany.
The Germans have looked at the working conditions that they operate.
We are cooperating with the German authorities, who have publicly confirmed that Ryanair is not the subject of these investigations. We are fully tax compliant in every country in Europe, but there is a dispute in France.
Yes,
one which the French will lose.
These pilots in Germany are claiming that the conditions they work under are actually dangerous. They've talked about the prevalence of pilots and co-pilots under your work conditions who doze off mid-flight, as well as make increased errors as a result of fatigue because of the contracts that you impose upon them.
Those are false claims made by German pilots' unions. The contracts we impose upon our Ryanair pilots, under which, by the way, by law in Europe, you cannot fly more than 900 hours a year, which is an average of 18 hours a week, for which you get paid up to €150,000 a year, which is why we have a waiting list of over 3,000 qualified pilots who want to join and fly with Ryanair. Now, in Germany, you have the German pilots' unions, none of whom have members in Ryanair.
Who say, and I'm quoting them directly,
are negotiating
these
pay
contracts
cuts and
throw
pension
pilots'
cuts
working
and job
conditions
cuts
back into
in
the 19th
Berlin
century.
and Lufthansa.
They've no part in our society today. It just comes to this point. You can say, oh, there's a justification for it. I'm just saying to you that
there's a justification for it. I said we employ more than 3,000 pilots. There's a waiting list of pilots who want to join Ryanair.
Before we end, I want to broaden the horizon from your business and the way you operate in Europe to a bigger thought about Ireland. You know, you're one of Ireland's richest, most successful businessmen. You're a sort of poster boy for Irish economic success over the last generation. You are. You can laugh, but you are. But right now...
And much hated here in Ireland.
Oh, I know that too, believe me. An Irish former Prime Minister said just the other day that in his opinion, the fallout from Brexit, and as we've discussed, it hasn't happened yet, but it is going to happen, represents the biggest challenge to Ireland and the whole Irish economy in 50 years. Do you think he's right?
No, I think we worry overly about the impact of Brexit here. We're no longer tied our currency to sterling, but it's clear, the UK is one of Ireland's biggest trading partner. I think there are real serious issues over the border between the Republic and the north of Ireland. And I worry about the imposition of a hard border, which I think is inevitable. If the UK...
Isn't the one idea being floated in London is that somehow the Irish authorities will take on board the border duties that one might have seen at a hard border with Northern Ireland, and then actually, for example, entry point in Dublin Airport will be policed along the lines and the wishes of the British government.
But see, there's lots of this nonsense being, talked about in London, where they're essentially talking to themselves. I think it's going to be very difficult when you have Boris Johnson and David Davies and Liam Fox go to Europe, file their Article 50 notification, and are then told you can have the single market, in which case you obey free movement of people or out. And if it's out, I think there will be a hard border imposed. And one of the reasons
what will that do for the Republic of Ireland?
The Republic of Ireland, we will adapt as we have always done over the years. We'll continue to trade successfully with the UK, although it will be a much more difficult trading environment, and we'll continue to trade successfully with Europe. We will adapt and we'll find a way around. But there is no doubt in my mind that the UK economy will suffer a very deep and prolonged recession if they move out of the single market.
But I think Enda Kenny, the Taoiseach, the Prime Minister here, believes that actually the people who suffer the most might be here in the Republic. I mean, he's talking about convening I think he's calling it a civic dialogue of business leaders, politicians for early November. As I said, you roll your eyes. Are you not interested in participating?
Talking shops set up by politicians to talk more about these things are a complete and utter waste of time. Like most business people, I'll just get on and deal with it, whatever the consequence of Brexit, we'll deal with. Ryanair will pivot some growth away from the UK, but we'll continue to grow strongly. I do worry, though, and it's one of the reasons I was critical of the Irish government response to the EU Apple tax ruling. Here you have the European Commission. We have sovereign, and we're a sovereign state. We have autonomy over our tax decisions. So if the Irish decide to tax Apple at 12.5%, they're free to do so. You can't have the European Union, though, 10 years after the event coming along and say, oh no, we think that was illegal state aid. The point I've made is, why haven't they gone to the UK and told them, listen, we don't like the res non-doms in London. We think you should be taxing all the Russian oligarchs. They wouldn't dream of doing that. So this is an example where the European Commission is trying to bully Ireland, and Ireland needs to do more. Rather than just appeal the decision, we need to tell the European Union to politely foxtrot Oscar, because that's the only language they understand.
Well, it's the only language you seem to be able to use.
Yeah, well, that's a bit unfair, but nevertheless, when the European Union tells Ireland in a Brexit scenario, you must put up walls around the north of Ireland, you must have a very hard border, Ireland needs to have a much more robust response with the European Commission. It's not in Ireland's interests, and we're not going to impose some hard border between the North and the Republic of Ireland, and if the European Commission doesn't like it, they can go to hell.
Well, you're not mincing your words, but to take that thought one stage further, Enda Kenny said recently, he said Brexit negotiators should be prepared for the prospect of a referendum on uniting Ireland. The truth is, a majority of the people of Northern Ireland actually voted to remain. Do you, as an Irishman, think there is any possibility that this whole sort of Brexit uncertainty could, in the long run, be the harbinger of a debate about uniting Ireland?
Look, I think that's a very sensitive subject.
Well, of course it is.
But
peace, what do you think?
We have peace in Northern Ireland for the last 10 years, which is a phenomenal achievement on all sides. I don't think it's appropriate for somebody in the Republic to be going, we want a united Ireland. We want peace in Northern Ireland.
This isn't your first appearance on Hardtalk. In 2009, you said this: I think there's going to be a certain time in the development of Ryanair where it's appropriate to take me out and replace me with somebody else. And I think that may be in the next 2 or 3 years. You said that in 2009.
Yeah.
Well, you're still here.
Just because I show how bad I am at predicting the future.
So when are you going to take yourself out?
I mean, look, we have a plan for the next 5 years to grow to 180 million passengers. We have very exciting developments in Ryanair Labs, in the digital platform, and it's a very exciting time in this industry. So I've signed up for another 4 years to take me to, I think, the end of 2019, and I think I and the board will revisit at that stage. And if the board is happy with the way I'm performing, then who knows? They'll either ask me to leave.
So you will be the guy who has to cope with whatever actual Brexit brings to Ryanair.
I hope so, but I'm pretty sure what what it'll bring will be lower fares and many more millions of customers.
Michael O'Leary, I'm going to stop you right there before the advertising gets really unbearable. Thanks for being on Hard Talk.
Thank you very much.
That was an edition of Hard Talk presented by me, Stephen Sacker. For details of our complete range of podcasts and our terms of use, go to bbcworldservice.com/podcasts.